All right. Have you ever suffered from good life guilt? That is the topic that we're talking about today. Good life guilt. So, one of the things that we as humans in our experience of life have a problem with is being too happy sometimes. So I heard Brene Brown talk about this one time, where she talked about foreboding joy. You're having this moment, you're just going along about your day, and then you have this moment of sheer joy. And then immediately your brain floods you with a very, very negative image. I think she gave the example of she was going along, driving along with her husband, and had this moment of complete gratitude for this moment and then had this terror-filled thought of what if it all ends. Good life guilt is kind of like that. We work, our sheer motivations in life are to gain pleasure, avoid pain, and totally blanking out on the third one, make things easier. I didn't say those scientifically, but you know what I'm talking about. You've probably heard of it. So good life guilt. So we're going along and we're doing a lot of things in our life to make our life better. We planned ahead. We saved up money. We to take a vacation. We meal planned so that we would have this life. I remember I was so overwhelmed with my life that I just went all into how can I make my life less overwhelming and how can I make it better? And this is about 15 years ago in Hiram and Maya's life. And we just questioned everything in our life. About that time, I discovered the concept of minimalism. And maybe a few years after that, I read a book about essentialism, very, very similar topics. But it gives you this idea that in your life, you only have so much bandwidth. And so you can give it to only so many different things. And so I took that concept and I realized, well, then if that's the case, then I'm going to get super, super clear on my priorities. I'm going to get super clear on my purpose, my vision, my values. And then, you guys, maybe this is not your cup of tea, but this is how my mind works. I literally cut out everything that was not in the top 3 to 5. Everything. Everything. It's like, how do we make life easier? And so I worked on it. So I decluttered my entire life. I taught my kids how to homeschool themselves. I questioned so many things that people never question. I questioned how we take care of our health. I questioned how we take care of our home. I questioned how we take care of our education. I questioned how we take care of providing for our financial needs. I questioned how we take care of ourselves by clothing ourselves and by providing shelter. And everything was on this chopping block because I was like, what is it that gives me joy? And what is it that's just I'm doing because everybody else is doing? And the more certain and the more clear that I got about these things, amazingly, then I just have more confidence about cutting them out of my life on the chopping block. So after a few years of doing this, I came to this point where I had an abundance, not a little bit of extra, not, a free weekend here and there. No, I had an abundance of time. It felt like I had solved this, what do you do when there's not enough time in your life? And I remember this point specifically, it was a couple of years ago, that I was walking along the river by our home in Missouri. And it was a gorgeous day. And this path was so beautiful. It was paved and there's trees everywhere and the wind's blowing and there's tons of wildlife. You never know if you're going to see a deer or maybe even an eagle. It was amazing. And it was the middle of the day. And I was so fortunate, so blessed, so thankful to be walking along, have the time to just take time out of my day to go on a walk along the trail. And that is when it hit me in between the eyes. It was horrible, people. Good life guilt. I shouldn't have it this easy. I am privileged, to use a popular term these days. I should be doing something. I should be doing something with my time. It was crazy. And all the enjoyment that I had in that moment, I lost because of this good life guilt feeling. Life is too good for my brain to handle right now. Now, what I love, and by love, I mean very, very sarcastically, what I find so hilarious about this moment was this. In that moment, my brain wasn't saying, enjoy the fruits of your labors of all the years that you've put in to create a lifestyle and a life that you love. Look how intentional you are in your life, and now it is paying off. That is what a holistic view of my life would have looked like. But I didn't do that. I just had this moment of, I've got it better than others, and I feel really bad about that. So I played with the title on this video a couple of times, which, by the way, I am doing this on YouTube so you can see the video, but I am also taking it to the podcast Brag About Life in case you are a person that likes to be out and about doing things while you listen to your podcast. Side note here, the only way that you're going to get me to exercise is if I have podcasts in my playing. I have found that it's the only way that I'm going to exercise. So anyway, so I had a sense of good life guilt, but I know that I'm not alone in it. I know that so many other people have it. And I almost call this podcast Gratitude versus Privilege, because there's a lot of talk these days about how people should acknowledge their privilege. And I want to still hit those two topics because I think you need to really be questioning some of the terms that, quote, the experts are telling us to take on in our life. And you need to question whether they're serving you or not. So, what is the definition of privilege? According to the dictionary that I looked up, it's a special right, an advantage, or immunity granted. This is really hilarious, by the way, the immunity granted piece. All right, let me finish reading the definition that I'm going to tell you. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. The immunity granted is cracking me up these days because have you noticed that there are rules for, the political class versus us? One of my biggest fears is getting audited by the IRS. I mean, it just feels like, I got my numbers wrong. How in the world? What could I do? And then you hear something like the Hunter Biden story, and you're like, well, if that's all that happens when you get audited by the IRS, is they tell you to, well, don't do that again and pay back what you owe us. That would be great. It feels like there is a certain immunity that is granted to certain people who are in close positions, proximities of power. All right. That's the definition of privilege. Here's why every time I see somebody, quote, acknowledging their privilege, I think it's doing them a disservice in a couple of ways. Number one, it's doing that person a disservice because now you're saying, I have some advantage that, quote, maybe you did not even give yourself, as in it frankly ignores the fact that you did not choose where you were born. You did not choose your skin color. You did not choose your IQ level. You did not choose your certain aspects that you were literally created with. So we're taking things that we were inherently created with or born to, like, for example, I have a two-parent family. I grew up where my mom and my dad stayed married the entire time. They're still married today. And this is where I'm quirky. I used to tease my kids that they were so not privileged because they grew up in a two-family home and therefore they only got one Christmas. They didn't get to have a Christmas with their dad and their stepmom and then a Christmas with their mom and their stepdad. And I use that sarcastically, very, very ridiculously. If you don't like my humor, you really should shut me off now. To point out this, everything that's happened in our past, everything that we are created with, we can have a positive or a negative viewpoint of it. The level of health that you have. I remember when I injured my back pretty severely about 10 years ago. And I could have thought, woe is me, I'll never be the same. But instead, that was the most transformative experience of my life because I said, okay, if this is all the strength that I'm going to have for the rest of my life, how do I make that work? And it gave me a totally different experience of life in that it changed everything. In that I went searching for new, not only new ways of doing things, better ways of doing things that changed my life so much that I actually have a career that pays me way more money now than I would have had if I'd never had that injury. So privilege, number one, replaces gratitude in your life. Okay. And it feels, secondly, like it becomes this obligation because I have this unfair advantage. Then therefore, I must use this advantage that I have to give other people equal advantage somehow, which is absolutely impossible, by the way. It totally ignores the fact that we all have this unique human experience. Secondly, it does harm to others because it is subtly telling people who do not have the same advantage that lacking that advantage is what is contributing to or making it harder for that person to succeed. I feel this very, very deeply on both sides in that. So let's just talk about that privilege piece a little bit. I am a white woman born in America. Now, for the first half of my life, I talked about the advantages, the blessings of being born in a country that is free, that has rules and governments and a stable environment where people can take chances on themselves and they can succeed, where the more risk you take on, the more opportunity there is for that risk paying off in a bigger and better way. I am the oldest of 9 children, and I was born to a farmer with a stay-at-home wife. Now, if I just said, I need to explain my privilege, first of all, my first privilege is that I am white. All right, well, I had nothing to do with that. Okay, second one is I am a woman. Now, is that a privilege or is that not a privilege? Because there is a whole lot of debate on which is better, to be a man or to be a woman. I would say to all that debate, that's ridiculous. Be who you were created to be and be thankful that you were created that way and stop comparing. This is where privilege replaces gratitude. So for all my life, I can be like frustrated that I was not born a man and I don't have the strength of a man and I don't have the height of a man. I'm very, very short. Well, I'm not terribly short, but I'm very not tall. I can talk about the privilege that tall people have that they can reach cans in the grocery stores, and I have to climb, racks to get to my cans because I don't want to patiently wait for a worker to help me reach something off the top shelf. Um, all these things. And then so let's talk about being the oldest of 9 raised on a family where I don't know exactly how much my parents made, but I would guess in the 1980s, it was somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 across a family of, well, kids were still being born. All right. I could say, well, definitely I did not have the privilege of wealth, but y'all, I had the privilege of experience. Poverty does not scare me. I know how to make ends meet. I know how to make things stretch. I had an education in how to make a dollar go farther by the time I was 12 that most people never get their entire lives. I had, being the oldest of 9, I knew how to manage children way before I was a parent. Now, someone could say, oh, you're taken advantage of because you were, the babysitter to them. Number one, it's better to be the oldest than to be the third oldest. I'm just going to tell you. It's better be bossing than be bossed. I try not to let it go to my head, but I'm 12 or 13. All these things. I can say, if I think it's a privilege, then what I'm doing is I'm saying that there's a limited amount of pie, and I am trying to now, I feel obligated to balance the scale altogether. But with gratitude, I can take anything, positive or negative, turn it to my advantage, leverage it because I've learned a lesson from it. And then I can share those lessons with others. And it doesn't matter if they are poorer than me or richer than me, they come from better health or worse health. If they lived in the city, lived in the country, there is so much benefit that I've pulled from my past experience that I can share with others that they can take what's helpful for them to increase their knowledge and to have a better experience in their life. This idea that for some reason we should feel guilty for having a good life is the kind of stuff that nightmares are made out of. Because if you feel guilty about something, guess what you do? You stop doing it. Your brain literally cannot handle this idea of going around guilty all the time. So you pull back. None of our best lives are going to be had if we're all pulling back on our efforts to make life better. So, good life guilt is not serving you. I see good life guilt a lot of times get in the way of what people, especially women, were really, truly meant to do. I've had the privilege to work with a few coaches that are beginning in their coaching journey. They are either starting their business or they're trying to refine their coaching skills. And one of the things that keeps on coming up for them is this: I feel guilty about saying no if I could say yes. And this is where I keep on saying it really is important that you know your purpose, you know your vision, you know your values, you know your priorities, because you think you're saying no to the other person to say yes to what you're wanting. And that feels like, well, that's selfish. I'm saying no to what they want to say yes to what I want. Isn't saying yes to what I want selfish and saying no to them unselfish? Not really. Because what if saying yes to what you want is going to make their life better in a different way? For example, let's just give the example of kids. I'm going to say, no, I am not going to help you tie your shoes when you're 6 years old I'm going to teach you and show you, but I'm going to allow you to practice on your own because it is not help to keep on tying your shoes for you when it's time for you to learn how to tie your own shoes. It's also not help for me to give you Velcro shoes if it's time for you to learn how to tie a knot. Um, Speaking about homeschooling, I I did a mean thing to my kids. I made them memorize all of their math facts, flashcards, until they knew them forwards and backwards, upside down, every which way. All of the math facts, all the way up to 12 times 12, all of the addition and subtraction. I think all the way up to either the 12 tables or maybe 18s. It sounds like I was being mean. They certainly thought I was being mean. Of course they did. But I knew, as a matter of fact, how much of a blessing it had been to my life to be able to know certain basic math facts at the drop of a hat of my fingertips. Just the other day, y'all, I lost my sunglasses and I went to the Sunglass Hut, and I like really nice sunglasses. So I wanted, just like my old ones, Ray-Bans. And I found a pair. And then I found out that they were having a buy one, get a second pair 50% off. And I'm like, oh, that's a deal that I just don't want to pass up. So I grabbed a second pair that I had been eyeing. I had been stuck between two pairs. So I grabbed the second pair. And when I checked out, I'm like, wait, the first pair was this much. The second pair should have been this much. Tax of 10% should have been this much. That doesn't feel right. And guess what? When I looked at my receipt, it was not right. They had typed in the wrong code. And so they had taken a certain dollar amount off rather than a certain percentage of 50% off. When she fixed it in the computer and gave me the refund, it was $49.99 refund, $50 refund, all because my parents made me memorize my math facts too. So it might have seemed mean to my kids, but that was the experience. That was the gift that I was hoping to give them later in their life. Do the mental math in your head, because you can't trust the computer to always get it right for you. And that's just one time. Hundreds of dollars just this year, I've noticed just out of that. I feel like I've moved off my topic a little bit. Sorry about that. Let me just say, good life guilt. When we operate from guilt, we are past focused, as in we are not future focused. Every solitary person's life gets better when we learn to look to our future to aim and plan. So if we're having good life guilt, we're either looking at somebody else and we're comparing our experience to them, or we're comparing our experience to our past. And so when we're doing this whole thing about apologizing for our privilege or acknowledging our privilege or things like that, literally, we are giving the reason for our success is because of things that you don't have, is what you're saying. And I just think that's a terrible, terrible thing. Last year I did an event certification in coaching that cost me lots of money. It was 5 figures. It was the most money I'd ever paid for anything outside my 4-year education for college. It was much more valuable to me. Well, I can't say that because I did meet my husband in college, and that was the really the valuable thing that I brought from college was hubby. But what I remember hearing the woman who did this advanced certification for me talk about how she struggled with the cost of it. She says, because I recognize that not everybody of every background has those means. And I thought, see, this makes me feel because I cashed out my retirement so I could do this. And I was even more proud of the level of sacrifice that I made just because I didn't have that amount of money sitting in the bank account collecting dust. It was for me the level of sacrifice that I had to go to actually afford that. And it's the same thing with my college education. The level of sacrifice that my parents had to go to help me in college, the level of sacrifice that I had to go through in order to finish paying for my college. I worked 40 hours a week and scholarships and all that. That made me value what I was getting way more than the next person from whom it was coming a little bit cheaper. When we talk about privilege, I'm telling you, we're just moving the topic off of gratitude. And we're doing it to the detriment of everyone around us. So stop giving your privilege the credit for your accomplishments. Stop giving outside circumstances the credit for your accomplishments. Because that is negating the free will that you have in your own life. All right, let's see. Let me scroll through and see if there's anything else that I wanted to hit about this topic. When we have good life guilt, then we take our guilt and we create an obligation, and then we kind of fall into this very prescriptive action, as in it needs to look like this, it needs to sound like this. We literally stop trusting ourselves and we start listening to what other people are telling us that we should be doing. But when we're coming from gratitude, we have thankfulness. And in thankfulness, we usually go to generosity and creative action. I am so grateful for the lessons of my past because out of the limitations that I faced, or out of the unique experience that I experienced. This is why I really, really struggle with this term privilege, because it makes it sound like there's some kind of exact standard that everybody deserved to have had. It really is taking out the unique human experience out of all of us. And we are all better for having had the unique human experience. But when we go from gratitude, we look at our unique human experience, and it forces us to use our creativeness, the very godlikeness in us, our creative spirit, to make our life better, and then to make everybody else's life better when we share that experience. So maybe you're not a white woman living in America who was the oldest of 9 children and had 2 children born to you who decided to homeschool and hurt her back halfway through. Maybe that hasn't been your privilege or lack of privilege. But there are some things that you might be interested in learning from me about how I homeschool, because I taught my children how to teach themselves, so that by the time they were basically by 10 for sure, but around between 8 and 10, they were teaching themselves and they were set up to succeed in and to reach a higher level of education than I had reached by being college educated, by being a college graduate and not doing bad myself. Because that's what creativity does. It sets other people up for success. So in the end, don't think of our life as this limited experience, that as good life guilt. If I experience better, if I experience more, there's less for you, because that is the exact opposite of how the world was created to be. As I experience more, as I utilize more, as I creatively create more, as I transform more, it's only better for all those around me. The secret to the good life is this: you have to get clear on your purpose, your priorities, your vision, your values. It's all about remembering who you are, whose you are, and why you're still here. What was I put on this earth to do? And never give up pursuing that. This is what's going to happen. You're going to make a hypothesis about this. I think I was meant to do this. And then, I don't know, 10 years later, you do it. And then you're like, and I'm still here. I think I need another goal. At least that's how it was for me. When I got serious about this, I was like, I want to have control of my time again. It feels like everybody's taking it from me. I'm going to take back control of my time. I took back control of my time. And then I'm like, okay, now I want to use this time to help others. And that has been one of the most exciting lessons. And I can't wait to find out what other exciting lessons are in store. All right. So, good life guilt. Don't allow the guilt to get in the way of your good life. Take the time to define what your good life is, then take the time to streamline, get to it, and cut out the things that just are not in line with it. And then when you get there, make sure you enjoy being there. All right. All right. That's all I got for you today. I hope this helped.